Hello, this is Maj Swadan, co-founder of GO Investing. On May 26th, May 29th, Little Grapevine released 6 pre-recorded public company video virtual presentations as part of its G1 virtual conference event. 2 of these companies were Crescendo Communications and Altigen Communications. Ticker symbols are CXDO and ATGN. Now, both of these companies play in the Unified Communication as a Service space, otherwise known as UCaaS. So Little Grapevine thought it would be a good idea to invite a telecom expert, Joe Hamblin, to talk about the evolution of the UCaaS industry, especially in light of COVID-19 and the rampant demand for cloud communication services offered by companies like Google, Microsoft, and Zoom. For example, Teams, Microsoft's answer to Slack, has been exploding in terms of the amount of users using the Teams platform. So I'm really glad to be able to be here and discuss UCaaS with Joe. So Joe, let's hear more about you and start this discussion off with a description of who you are and a little about your history.
My name is Joe Hamblin. I'm the Vice President of Infrastructure and Operations for one of the leading wireless carriers here in the United States. I've been in telecommunications for over 30 years. Getting my start back in the original interconnect company days, right after the divestiture of AT&T in the early 80s is when I got into this. So my background really dates back to the voice days of key systems from companies like TIE, Mitel, Nortel, NEC. That's where my roots go back to. Today we're going to discuss and focus primarily on unified communications as a service, and this area here is something that I've been engaged in for well over a decade, going back into the middle 2000s, when running a large enterprise and being responsible for roughly almost 489 PBXs for the large enterprise inside this wireless carrier. I had a group of about 60 voice engineers that worked for me at that time that was doing the care and feeding of all those PBXs, the typical upgrades, and going out and doing the refresh, taking care of the circuits, those types of things. And we started looking at, a lot of things was happening at that time. You had, obviously, the wireless business had boomed starting in the early 2000s and really started becoming very consumerized. So you saw a real emergence there. And then broadband. And what ended up happening was, it really changed the landscape of the way our user community worked. While they still were very much engaged and active, by bringing those 2 capabilities to bear, it allowed for a lot more mobility. And we had a lot of our folks who were still working, and they were working out in the, both from their home, from their favorite coffee shop, and from the customer's premise locations. What we ended up finding out was that legacy voice strategy was no longer meeting the business needs. And that's when we started looking at how do we reinvent ourselves. And the first thing we did was we started going down the traditional strategy of just doing VoIP. But, that left some challenges from the standpoint as it wasn't integrated with the way our user community worked. And that's really kind of how we started our strategy, was really that pane of glass in. Where was my users at? And the very simple answer for the bulk of my folks were they spent their day inside of Outlook, right? So this was the tool they used. And at that time, we had an IM session called Live Communication Server, which predated OCS, which was Office Communication Server from Microsoft, then became Link, now becomes Skype. So we were playing in this space back when it was Live Communication Server. In those early days, Microsoft knew very little about voice, but they did have some ideas. And the thing that they had was the GUI interface, right, that my user community was very comfortable with. And that's why we kind of formulated our strategy around, rather than having our users have to swivel seat over, pull up another application to conduct their real-time collaboration and then swivel seat back so they could do email and their calendar and going back and forth all day. Our strategy was really around how do we bring that experience together so we can cut down on some of that and make it more intuitive, and presence was a big piece of that, and the ability to click to pick your modality on how you wanted to collaborate, whether it's IM, whether it's chats, whether it's voice or video. So that was the strategy. How do we make those things better? Now, back then, the challenge was really we were running Windows XP, so very limited capabilities from an OS standpoint, running old hardware that maybe didn't have enough memory, didn't have enough CPU, those types of things. So we had to work with Microsoft to understand how we wanted to drive a better user experience. Because I'm going to tell you, those days they knew very little about voice. Their whole strategy was, we'll take whatever's there and we'll use our RTA codec and we will try to make that work in the environment. So we had to do a lot of things in the early days to do things like quality of service, prioritizing packets, making sure that a voice packet took precedence over web surfing or an email. So doing a lot of those things to tune the network, to tune the operating system on the desktop, and then create an environment that really kind of allowed the end user to move and work anywhere they want. So what we ended up really seeing as things evolved was, we created an environment where work was something you did, not someplace you went. And that was truly the great outcome of unified communications. And it allowed my company to recruit talent anywhere in the world. Not everybody wants to move to the Midwest. So it allowed us to have the ability to recruit talent anywhere, allow them to come up and be able to contribute and participate in the overall ecosystem and the success of the company.
Great background there, man. So originally, some of the changes you talked about were mainly for within the organization, I'm assuming. So at some point, though, this has transcended to a much bigger thing, right? Communicating with customers, and so maybe you can talk about a little bit about how it's gone away, it's expanded away from the company and now to customers, and how that helps.
Yeah, so we had some burning platforms, again, with the particular company that I worked for. The financial challenges continued to be eroded, and you guys can go and research the history of all of the carriers, and you'll find which one I'm talking about. But, one of our things is we were driving out costs of real estate, right? So we use this as a collaboration tool to help us reduce the amount of brick and mortar that we had to have for our full-time employees. So there's cost savings there. We were paying third parties for audio conferencing. So not even video conferencing back then, audio conferencing. We brought all that in-house and saved ourselves another, give or take, $8 million a year internally. Drove out another $30 million in real estate because we just simply started shutting down offices out in the field and allowing those people to go work at home. Instead of having that small office that supported 10 or 15 people, one of our strategies was take unified communications and our collaboration tools, close that office, let those folks go home, leverage their broadband, do some type of stipend or something like that if we needed to. So a lot of capabilities there that was brought to bear outside of just unified communications. It really becomes, how do you apply this to the entire organization? And I'd say over time, as we saw the industry evolve, it's really become about enabling capabilities to allow people to participate, communicate, and collaborate anywhere in the world. And you see, and we'll talk more about it later, how this has really impacted and how COVID has really highlighted the needs for this outside of just the typical workforce that you have now. We're having to think about, hey, how are we going to handle care differently? How are we going to handle even retail differently? What are the different things we need to think about long term?
So there's obviously been a lot of changes gone through the years, but what's interesting is that I think I saw a stat, 70% of small business enterprises haven't adopted a UCaaS solution yet. And I'm wondering, obviously COVID is going to speed that up now, but what was taking so long for that to happen, you think?
Well, I think the biggest thing, when you look at a lot of the legacy telephone systems, right, they just run. So when you think about it from a small SMB standpoint, that typically have a brick and mortar office that people would come to, while they would love to do some of these things, might have not been the need because they were all there together. That's one. So they didn't have quite the mobility needs unless they had field folks and they needed to figure out how to bring in mobile apps and those types of things so they can keep that communications and collaboration out into the field. But for the most part, if they're smaller businesses, they're all coming to the same location on typically the same day. They've had these legacy key systems and PBXs there. And for the most part, knock on wood, if you leave them alone, they'll just run. They don't need a whole lot of care and feeding. So here's an asset they don't need to invest in. And for an SMB, you got to think about every place you're going to spend money, and you want to spend the money where it's going to drive you the most revenue, right? And it's typically going to be back into their products and services that they do on a daily basis. So I would say that's probably the biggest number one factor into why some of the SMBs have been slower to take this, adopt a unified communication strategy.
Great. Now, I think like when people think about this industry and they just think phone system, they think communication. They don't really think about it being like this really difficult thing, right? So maybe you could, for a layman person out there, just to help us understand why you kind of touched upon it already, right? But what is so important about it? What does it really do for an organization? And if you can talk about many different things it does for an organization, why they should adopt a UCaaS solution, and what it really does. Some of the conveniences, some of the efficiencies, maybe some of the maybe driving revenue, kind of these things.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it's all around speed to make decisions, and being able to bring the right people together at the time to get them on whatever the modality you choose, whether it's an IM session, we want to have a group IM, or if it's a video call, hey, let's be able to bring those resources together quickly, rather than scheduling meetings. If you're available and I'm available and I can see your presence, hey, let's go ahead and get on the call. Let's solve this problem, whether it's video, maybe we can do it in an IM. Email's great, but what I've learned over time is not a lot of people can keep up with their email because they get peppered with it. Not a lot of people pay attention to drive out the details that's in the email. Either we write poorly or we misinterpret what was written. So a lot of times it's just, hey, let's quickly get together in some type of a forum, whether it's a video call, whether it's a voice call, and let's have this conversation in real time. Let's make a decision. Let's go forward. And I don't think whether you're a large enterprise or a small business, being able to make quick decisions quickly is key for everyone's success. I think the other piece is you start thinking about how do my customers want to engage me? Now, email's great, website's great. Being able to break off that website and get to an agent, and it may start with, I want to have just a chat session. And I'm kind of a fan of that because I can multitask and chat with somebody that I might be working on a billing question, or an insurance company that, hey, I have a question on this. But if I need to evolve that into a real-time conversation, at least having the ability to elevate that to a voice call while I'm in that omni-channel, if you will, is valuable. And then if you want to make it even more intimate, more engaging, maybe you offer a video solution where you can actually see this agent real time and have the conversation. So there's a lot of things that get lost without face-to-face engagements, but you get a lot of that back with video. So now you can see the expression on someone's face, you can see the emotion in their posture and those types of things. There's a lot of verbal communication that takes place that gets lost as we get more distant, socially distant from each other. But these tools give us the ability to really bring back that engagement and offer another level of interaction with our customers.
Okay. So when you look at the space, there's some few big players and a lot of small players in this industry, and what makes some companies more special than others, or is there really anything that makes them special as opposed to size?
Yeah, size
is there a service differentiator among these companies?
Yeah, I think the size is the challenge. So if you look at Microsoft, obviously, and Cisco and Google, those are the three big players, right? And they got a lot of money, they got a lot of solutions, they get all of the capabilities across the ecosystem, except Cisco does not offer an email solution right now. But it starts with starts with that email and starts with that engagement and that Outlook calendar where people spend their day. The challenge you have is because the ecosystem is so complex, where these larger companies have a challenge implementing those solutions is getting the understanding. Not these small SMBs, they don't have an IT organization to help them make the right technical decisions. They don't help them with the organizational readiness and making sure that the solution is delivered correctly and the training is done, because it's like anything. I can put solutions out there and some of it will grow organically, but if I don't teach you how to integrate it into your business and how it works with maybe your workflows and those types of things, now all of a sudden you have spent X number of dollars for a Google suite, or you've spent X number of dollars for an E5 solution from Microsoft, but you're not getting the value out of it because you don't have the technical resources internally to help you do the organizational readiness to take advantage of it. So that's, I would say, the challenge. And that's even in an enterprise. I mean, there is so much space when you start thinking about what's in that ecosystem, from content sharing to the IM. When I look at collaboration, it makes up, voice, video, social, content. All of those things make up a collaboration suite, and how we collaborate on a document, right? Well, being able to educate and have organizational readiness for some of these smaller companies is a big challenge, and there's not many out there who do it and do it well. So that's probably the biggest challenge. You're buying a lot of capabilities, you're buying a lot of technology, but are you getting the value out of it because you understand the ecosystem well enough to apply it to your organization?
Yeah, so when you look at like a Ringcentral, for example, so you have Ringcentral, you have Microsoft. How do they all fit together here? I mean, we're all 8x8, Ringcentral, and now Microsoft's kind of in the mix. What is Microsoft doing right now in the industry? Are they kind of what's their role in UCaaS versus like Ringcentral's role in UCaaS?
Yeah. So when you look at the Googles and the Microsofts, obviously they own every modality. Now, what they don't do is they don't do the traditional PBX type features that many of us have come to learn and know and apply still to many organizations today. The ability to transfer a call easily, the ability to have POTS lines and those types of things for areas where I don't need a high-end desktop solution, or where I don't have a actual terminal there where I can do a VoIP call. So you still see some of those gaps. When you look at 8x8 and Ringcentral, obviously they have a really good market share from the standpoint 8x8 typically works in that SMB space, but they struggle, along with many, in some of the video capabilities. There's an inconsistent experience that you have, and that's not just their challenge. That is the challenge for the video collaboration experience in general, because everybody has a standard, therefore nobody has a standard, right? And trying to find solutions that work cross-platform, so whether it's Zoom, whether it's Teams, whether it's Skype, whether it's Google Hangouts, nobody really does a good job of bridging across all of them. So now it's like, okay, which one are we going to meet on? And I've got to have all these different clients. So that's one of the challenges that's facing the whole market. 8x8, I think the other thing is they have some third-party resources that do a lot of their integration work, and not all of them, just reading the feedback and understanding what's going on there, not all of them are fully immersed and have an understanding of the ecosystem and can represent the product well. And then, I think they're also kind of limited roughly, North America and Europe has kind of been their focus. So there's not a broader overall ecosystem, because a lot of our development, as Ed can attest to, a lot of our development's done over in Europe now, right? Or excuse me, in Asia now. We pull a lot of our development out of China and out of Taiwan. So being able to bring those developers at a reduced cost from what we have to pay in Europe and the United States is critical to a lot of small businesses. So I need to be able to tap into those resources in the Philippines and in Taiwan and stuff. That's a much cheaper rate from a development standpoint to move my business forward. So those are the things from an 8x8 or even a Ringcentral. How do I, one, allow my portfolio to work across multiple geographies, right? So I can bring in additional resources from Asia markets, from India markets. They're critical.
Ed, Mike, you want to jump in? You have any comments? Ed, you're probably more able than me to jump into this than I am.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just a quick question. So, Joe, I guess with your kind of perspective on the industry, do you think that there's going to be any consolidation in the industry, and if so, what makes some of the smaller players attractive targets to the other companies that are out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of these, if you look at Google's ecosystem, they do a lot of partner value add partners, and then that's one of the challenging things. While it's great because it's kind of an open market, but it also makes it very complex from okay, how do I apply this Google solution to my environment? So because I have to bring in so many different third-party players to help me with the integration or bring in additional tools. So that's one of the challenges you have there. I think the key piece, though, the opportunity that comes with that is whether you're going after a vertical market and applying your typical solutions and applying that into whether it's healthcare or financials and bolting that onto the Microsoft solution. I think contact centers is going to be a key opportunity and one that I'm looking for as I think about my own ecosystem. I want to take my team's environment, but I want to bolt on contact center solutions on top of that, where I don't have to run yet another ecosystem over the top for the GUI UI for my end user community. I want to keep my UIs as simple for my customers as possible. So that's where I start thinking about who are those companies out there that can leverage that large ecosystem. You know, Microsoft now, I think they said they've reached over 75 million Teams users. You know, they got over half a billion customers leveraging their ecosystem. So that's a huge marketplace, but they don't do everything and they don't do everything well. So now who do I find as those partners out there that can bolt onto it and leverage that ecosystem and that powerful marketing tool? And it's just, like I say, it's just untapped customer base out there that you can put in your vertical solution or your specific collaboration tool that makes that a better ecosystem, right? It's whether that will be ASF, we don't make the solution, we make it better. It's kind of those strategies that I'm looking at as far as, hey, we don't make email, we don't make collaboration, we make it better for your environment. And some of it could be a niche play for finance or for healthcare.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think another trend that we tend to see too is something you hit on earlier, is that SMBs don't typically have an IT department at their access to help navigate and deploy some of these UCaaS solutions. And just wondering, do you think that there's an opportunity for some of the smaller players to kind of take that lane and offer a higher level of service? Is that value add, or do you think it's just going to be more of a market shift to make products easier to use?
Well, you would love to think that the products themselves become easier to use, but unfortunately, the more we put into the ecosystem, the more complex it seems to get. Now, I'm not sure how that happens, but that's exactly what we're dealing with. A lot of the things that folks are trying to do. It's really going to take, to me, it's you're talking almost like IT as a service, if you will, right? How do I go into that SMB where I can afford to hire the smart SharePoint developers, the guys that understand what used to be Flow, now it's called Pro Apps, those types of tools? How do I go into those organizations, understand what the organization does, understand their challenges, understand their business processes, and start applying these tools specifically for that organization? Do I think there's an opportunity there? Yeah. The problem is, what are people willing to pay? Because it's going to take smart guys. It's going to take it's not going to be a cheap labor force that comes in there. And how much can you afford to put into it? But then at the same time, if you can't continue to evolve your business and move it forward, maybe the bigger question for that small SMB is, how much why it's expensive to do. The value in return is probably outweighs, okay, if I ignore it and continue to keep doing things off an old spreadsheet or those types of things, how do I make it where it integrates into my business? And I think where that quote IT as a service is going to be an opportunity for someone for the SMB space. But how do you bring those folks together, and then you keep, I see it in my own space. I'm constantly being poached by my counterparts trying to come after my talent, and there's a trade-off there. But I absolutely agree, there's a place for an IT as a service type organization to bring these things and help lay that on top of the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Michael, do you have any questions?
So you mentioned a couple times that the cost factor. I've noticed a lot of UCaaS providers are claiming that they can actually save SMBs, somewhere between 25, 50%, depending on the services. Why would that in and of itself not be a selling point to just switch over from legacy to UCaaS? And where's the extra cost that you mentioned coming from?
Yeah, so when you think about a lot of these SMBs, right? They're focused on a specific business. They've got their back office processes for billing and for managing their customer bases. So their EMC and their BMC tools that's where they put a lot of their focus for their business, and then into their overall product development. So now you come back to them and say, okay, I'm going to drive out 25% of your collaboration costs or your voice costs. Okay, it's kind of like where, right? Most of these key systems they're using, most of the PBXs that they're using, that they're trying to get them off of, they're pretty bulletproof. They've run for the better part of 2 decades, probably with very little care and feeding. And the only time you're going to get them to maybe do something different is when it truly does fail. And maybe that's the opportunity to do something different, rather than putting in. But it does move you to okay, here is a sunk asset. I own it. Why take it away if it's still working for me? Now, when it fails, now you're going to move to a rented model. So I'm going to see an additional OpEx pressure come at you, but you're going to get a whole bunch of new capabilities that go along with it. And I think that, to me, that's where that opportunity is. You have to figure out, how do you sell that to that customer? If I'm going to promise you, hey, I'm going to save you 25%, how, right? I'm not paying anything for this old legacy quote phone system. So how are you going to save me that money? From my telco costs? Yeah, those are pretty cheap. So now I go back to licensing, and this is where I go back to my Microsoft and my Google. I pay for that license. It's in skins. A lot of these things I'm just turning on new capabilities. So if I have an E3 and I want to bump it up to an E5, that's probably pretty palatable for 200 to 300 people in a small business organization. But when I look at it and say, okay, I'm going to go from a E3 to an E5 and I don't have a burning driver to do it, now it's a little bit different challenge, which it's really going to be value added selling. How do you go in there and understand the business well enough to put together that story to say, yeah, I can save you 25%. A lot of that is soft costs, and most of these small businesses are dealing with hard realities of, here's what I'm looking for, real hard dollars. And if you can get to hard dollars in your evaluation, then you have the business case.
So really, it would be about the person, whether it's a salesperson or the point of contact in the UCaaS company, having a thorough understanding of what the customer's needs are and kind of creatively presenting those savings.
Yep. And now you get back into that cost of customer acquisition. How much time does this integrator want to spend understanding a small company that may generate, X number of dollars over what time? What's your return on investment? What's your total cost of acquisition? Now, the nice thing about it is, if you're the provider where you're generating on that recurring revenue, right? If you get access to part of the recurring revenue versus one-time integration fees, now it's like, okay, once I get that customer acquired and I plan on that customer being with me for 60 months or longer, right? And it's a reoccurring value on monthly installments. That's a pretty nice market. I don't have to do quite as much hunting. I can focus more on my existing businesses and help grow that share of wallet versus always having to be out there hunting, because I have that recurring revenue stream coming in. So that, to me, is the next value piece, is they change their economic models from premise-based to now cloud-based. I get recurring revenue. Now I can go back and focus on that. Maybe it's a smaller base of customers, but I'm able to tie in more intimately with what they're trying to do because of that recurring revenue.
Thank you.
Hey, I got a question here, guys, if you don't mind. So, Joe, as an investors, we look at this landscape we're in now as well. It's a lot, even before COVID came along, a lot of opportunity. So many companies left and adopted UCaaS. So you see this interesting fertile ground, and it probably could allow a lot of competitors to compete for some period of time, because there's so much market share to kind of share there or take. But I wonder, though, at some point now, especially with COVID now, is there a mad rush now to go get that market share at one time, because it's all coming at one time? And what does that mean for customer acquisition costs? What does it mean for margins? What does it mean for operating profitably for a lot of these companies? Are you concerned that this becomes way too commoditized, and in order to compete and gain market share, a lot of these companies won't be able to maybe compete or profitably, or even have the money to be able to go there, compete and get market share?
Yeah, so obviously social distancing and COVID has created a variety of opportunities and or challenges for enterprises and small businesses alike, right? How do you change kind of your engagement model with your customers? We see it in our space, in the wireless space, trying to create where folks used to come into call centers. Now we're trying to ship them home. And in many cases, organizations weren't prepared to do this. So we've had to focus on that, creating new solutions to get folks out there, buying additional licensing. I think what you end up seeing over time is just, this will continue, right? This is going to change the way our world is. We're not going to go back to our norm. So now you think about my generation, if you were, in the old days, if we were sick, right, we would still come to work in many cases. I still feel good enough to go to work, just I'm battling, I got a touch of something, right? Well, now that's going to change. The social distancing and social norms and social acceptance is going to change. We're going to be forcing those folks to, hey, yeah, I know you still feel good enough. We're going to try to give them new tools to work at home. UCaaS is going to provide that for us. And I think that's where the opportunity comes. People are going to reevaluate how their business has to operate going forward. I think it's going to challenge the brick and mortar. The WeWorks of the world are going to see a different set of challenges, because people now are proving that, you know what, I can still get a lot of work done, and I can allow people to work from home. Maybe I don't need quite as big an office space. So I think that's going to become an interesting trend to watch as we come back into the new norm and we start sending people back to work. There may be less need for traditional office space. Now, you're going to lose some culture because people aren't together as much going forward, but there'll be different ways to collaborate and communicate. So those are some of the opportunities I see.
Yeah, but when you look at it from the point of, that's a great viewpoint from the potential customer point of view, with the users of UCaaS solutions. But what about from the actual providers of UCaaS solutions? Now, do you see a problem where you have the Ringcentrals, 8x8, even Microsoft now, Ringcentral, and the smaller companies? there's a lot of market share to get there, but it's coming at them faster now.
Yep.
Are they gonna have to give concessions to get that market share? And I guess what does it do for the competitive environment for the UCaaS providers? Do you see a situation where, hey, it's great for them all, or it's going to be a situation where customer acquisition costs are going to go up, our margins are going to get squeezed a little bit, or is it too early to tell?
I think some of it's going to be too early to tell, but it also gives them an embedded base. So now they can go back in there, and how do they do a little bit more farming instead of hunting? Then go back in their embedded base and say, okay, what additional capabilities are you going to need going forward? And you can upsell, whether it be contact center solutions, or you can upsell additional licensing, because maybe they've had to change the way their organization is established. Maybe they're going to put more people into more care and taking care of their customers to retain that base versus focusing on the selling, right? So I think there's going to be opportunities to upsell into their existing base more. You're going to have some companies, right, that were completely caught off guard, that were relying on those legacy switches that have been in place for a long time, that had no type of work from remote or work from anywhere capabilities. Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, we've talked about it. We got caught off guard here, and it could have been very detrimental to their business. Now all of a sudden here's new market opportunities that these folks, the 8x8s, the Ringcentrals, and others can go back in there and upsell to. And then you also have the big behemoths out there that already have, the Microsofts and the Ciscos, that already have an embedded base in many of these places. You'll be hard pressed to find somebody that's not running Google or Microsoft, right? So now here's the opportunity to add on different capabilities that gives those work from home collaboration suites and tools to that workforce. So yeah, I think you're going to see the UCaaS space accelerate. You're going to see whoever those folks were who were hanging on to legacy platforms and systems that were still being mined and still being leveraged. Those things will see a new set of pressures where you can add in more UC type solutions and upsell those.
So that's a great point. And basically wallet share gains. I was interviewing a company maybe a month ago, and it seemed they provided video capture technology mainly for the educational higher level education facilities and stuff. So, and what I learned was like, hey, well, they had these, they've had legacy customers for a long time, but they were only 20 or 30% penetrated into that customer base. And now it was when I was, with COVID and everything, having to work from home and go to school from home or be online. now these institutions are scrambling to continue to adopt more of these solutions within the organization. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, when you look at particularly education, right, we're going to see a lot more remote learning. So now you think about that's going to put a different stress on whiteboarding capabilities, going to put additional stress on content sharing capabilities. They may not need all of unified communications, content, whiteboarding, video. So companies like Shindig has a very unique solution that would work great in a small classroom, 20, 30 people, where you can join and everybody kind of has a chance to go up on the podium. So you're going to see things like that. I think Zoom's going to see an opportunity to do some things inside of the educational area. But these video companies for remote distance learning is going to be really, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there because, again, as we move into cold and flu season, there may be such a thing that you're you're showing up to class differently. I'm not completely well, so I'm not going to go to class, but I'm going to participate in class, and I'm going to do it via video conference and the whiteboarding capabilities. So I think there's going to be lots of different ways to solve some of the problems that we traditionally looked at in the past, where we actually had to physically get together. That's not going to be the accepted norm going forward.
And that's right. Later on, we should maybe the next few days talk about a particular stock I'm looking at as an activist potentially, because they're in this industry and they're trying to go, I guess, private to some degree at a steep discount to where I think they're worth. So I think your input would be nice in that. Maybe we could talk about that. I'd like to get your opinion on that. Okay. So I think we hit a lot of areas here, but I want to go back real quick to Microsoft again. So we talked about the growth in Teams, and there was a point in time, I think Ed can kind of attest to this also, where Slack thought Teams wasn't going to touch them, and it looks like Teams is obviously taking the lead now. And I'm wondering if we look at now, Microsoft is slowly getting now, or actually aggressively getting into UCaaS, further into UCaaS now, and you see there's like some little holes that they haven't filled yet. As they fill these holes, what does it mean for like a Ringcentral? Like Ringcentral probably doesn't maybe view Microsoft as a serious competitor just yet, just the way Slack maybe didn't for a period of time. Do you think some of these like bigger Ringcentral kind of competitors are going to say, hey, what not see it coming? What is Microsoft's role eventually going to be 5 years from now? How do you see this looking like for a Ringcentral versus Microsoft?
It's really around execution, right? Can Microsoft play in these spaces? Absolutely. Can they play in them well because they can execute in them well is going to be their challenge. And that's where I think the Ringcentrals, the 8x8s, maybe not Slack so much, because Slack really plays kind of a pretty niche role that Teams can consume in a heartbeat, where they some of the separations and you see Microsoft closing that even with Slack is just the size of the channels. Microsoft viewed that space as, why would you want to have 10,000 people in a channel that is more chatter than you can keep up with? But there are some companies that say, hey, I want to use Slack throughout my entire company with one channel. But so Microsoft will adjust that, right? Put some more pressure on Slack, especially if they are an existing Microsoft customer. That they will see undue pressure there because, okay, not only am I doing Slack, it's built on SharePoint. So I can share content in there very easily. I can build teams on the fly. I can keep a history of all my chat, everything that Slack does, and does it even better. And oh, by the way, it's in my contract. So why would I not leverage that contract to its fullest versus buy that and then shut those features off and buy another product to do the same thing? You'll see folks making trade-offs at the enterprise space. When you think about going into some of that legacy collaboration space that the 8x8s, the Ringcentrals, and those types of things have done for years, the reason why they're successful is they understand that space in and out. To Microsoft, it's going to be kind of peripheral. It's part of the ecosystem, but it's not their primary focus. So execution in those spaces is going to be their challenge. And if they can figure out how to crack the code on that to where they can execute at the same level as a Ringcentral or as a 8x8, now you got a little bit of a problem on your hands if you're those companies. But that's yet to be seen, because it's, there's a lot of understanding that space, particularly in and around contact center solutions, understanding that space inside and out. that is a area that you really have to be on top of your game because of the amount of things it's touched. Cisco's learned to do it. They do it well. We'll see if Microsoft can learn to do it, or if they. My guess is they'll probably leverage third parties to allow them to do that and compete in that space. And will they help those third party solutions so they can continue to grow that share of the market? Will be interesting.
I think in a previous conversation we had, you talked about call centers as being an area that you kind of were excited about for the space. Maybe you can get in that a little bit.
Well, just because of the cost, when I think about the traditional iron manufacturers of this space, you were looking at roughly, $1,200 to $1,500 a seat to get those turned up in the old premise type solutions. And now when you look at it from a SaaS type solution, very, very expensive. So finding an ecosystem that I can bolt onto Teams and get into that space and leverage a platform I already have that I pay for already. Now I just want to bolt on a solution that allows me to do an omni-channel type contact solution. I think there's real opportunity there because, again, it's just recurring revenue. And once I get embedded into an enterprise with my contact center solution, it's very hard to get me out of. Training costs, organizational readiness if I want to switch. If somebody can come in there and deliver well and do it for the right price, it's going to be really hard to get those folks out of it, which gives Microsoft a deeper embedded base, right? That's not going to churn on them, and it's going to give whoever those third-party providers are that's coming in there providing those unified communication solutions. If they can do it at an affordable price, help me drive down my costs, it's going to be really hard to get me out once I'm in.
Yeah, I think I have anything on Mike add? Anything to add before I get my next question? Cool. So I guess as investors, we'd like to hear your opinion on. So if you're in an interview a CEO of a company who's playing in the space, what are some of the things you want to ask them, and what are some of the things that would scare you about some of the answers they were giving you, or some of the solutions they weren't providing, maybe to help us?
Yeah, to me, when I'm looking at any of those type of investment opportunities, it's all about execution. It's all about, how do they build that moat, if you will? What is their moat, and understanding what keeps them from being threatened by the Ciscos and the Googles and the Microsofts and 8x8 or Ringcentral. What is your moat, right? And understanding where do they see their next round of threats coming from? What's their biggest concerns coming at them in the eco space, right? That's probably the biggest thing for me is do they have the right CEO to execute? Where are they investing, right? How do you keep evolving your product so it stays ahead? How do you keep adding new value adds to those capabilities? What's their vertical? Maybe it's a vertical strategy. What is it that they bring to the market space that makes them unique and makes people? Is it price? Is it total features? Is it the ability to integrate and upsell inside once they're there? I mean, you guys understand this space better than I do, but this is an area that is very complex, and I think those CEOs who can take the complexity out of that for their customers are the ones that's going to separate themselves.
And I think even for some of these smaller companies, having good partners is really important because the direct sales force can't be there as aggressive.
Yeah, I think that's where the biggest challenge is. What type of VARs do they have? Especially those ones that can't get out there and be with the customers. And to me, it's your value-added resellers that understand your products and how many other products are those VARs carrying, because they can't learn them all and they can't understand them all. So do you focus on the ones that are truly in certain verticals like healthcare or like insurance, those types of things that can make their products deeply integrated into those businesses? That would be a great execution strategy. Too many times we try to boil the ocean. We try to be all things to all players, and I don't know how that scales as we continue to evolve and go forward.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks. You offered a lot of insight today. I really appreciate you doing this. I'd love to have you on again to talk more about the industry and see what's 3-4 months from now, see what's happened with COVID, see some of the things that might have changed, and maybe we'll get into some other topics also.
think it's really helpful to sometimes get the bigger picture, just and kind of connect the dots at an industry level to that. And that's sometimes a lot of investors, at least that I'm interacting with, miss that and get too focused on the day-to-day of a specific stock or a specific company, and don't really understand that there's a flow or a cadence within the industry and in the technologies. And I think a big theme that I'm kind of focusing on right now is just workflow simplification and workflow automation.
Yep.
And what I think a lot of investors maybe miss on some of this UCaaS story is that for IT administrators, you touched on this, they don't want to have 25 different platforms that they're trying to integrate and deploy and roll out to, and then support for their customer base, especially with larger organizations. So any company that can come along and kind of consolidate that, and we've all seen those documentaries of the shark or the whale swimming along. It's got the little fish that swim along next side of it in the ocean. That's kind of how I look at this UCaaS ecosystem. And there's a few exciting players out there, that we've discussed before that fit and swim alongside some of those whales like a Microsoft. And I think that's a good analogy for what's happening.
No, I agree with you. I think that's part. You saw that. You really see that in Google's space, where they have it's almost the complexity of understanding all their value-added partners is almost as complex as just understanding the products themselves and how they work. And that's one of the things I think Google has got to kind of clean up for themselves is, when you got the Maven waves and some of the other partners that they're leveraging, it gets really complex from an enterprise perspective when I start thinking about if I were to take that bold leap of trying to unbolt Microsoft and put in Google and take myself another way, am I really going to save myself any money by the time I have to bring all these other value-added players in here? And to me, when I did this exercise many years ago, the answer was no. Plus, I put my organization through a whole lot of upheaval learning this new platform. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Like even with Microsoft, yeah, they have some great products, great solutions, but getting folks to understand those capabilities. You talk about, what we used to call flow, and you speak on that. The number of things that you can do inside and out of flow to my organization, and even as an end user, is incredible. The challenge is most of my folks don't want to have to learn IT to leverage these tools, right? You don't want to be an IT executive. I work in finance. I work in accounting. I work in sales. I don't want to be an IT expert to have to do this stuff, and that's where that execution and delivery is the challenge. And I think that's where there's the opportunity for somebody, if they can figure out how to solve that model and still make a buck without being so damned expensive that SMBs particularly shy away from it. That would be a great opportunity for folks. And I think, again, that's because I love the capabilities, but myself, and I've been in this business a long time, there's some of it I'm not smart enough. I got to go find one of my smart guys, say, how in the hell do I take this cookie cutter flow and apply it to my business?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's an interesting kind of phenomenon, I think, where sometimes there's like a first mover advantage for some of these companies and products where you just become the default technology or application that people learn. And then they say, hey, this is the way I'm used to doing it. And they don't want to, like you said, they don't want to have the mental hurdle to have to learn a new platform. And so that creates a little bit of an intermediate moat for some of the companies. But then at the end of the day, as it gets commoditized, as Maj was touching on, sometimes there's just that executive decision from on high that says, hey, Microsoft's our platform. It's got all the bells and whistles that we need that are close enough. We're going to go with the solution.
I think as an enterprise owner, for me, it's all about, okay, I've got to pay this. How do I squeeze all the lemon juice out of this lemonade or this lemon that I've been given? How do I squeeze all the value before I go and buy something else? The next big one is, again, to me, video is just, as an owner, IT owner, it's just a pain in my backside because I'm having to deal. Everybody's got a different flavor this month of something they want to use. And then trying to optimize that to work on my network from a quality of service and prioritization standpoint is just a thorn that just continues to be there. And it's been there for the better part of a decade now. And that's because every standard is adopted. And, if you got all these standards, then you got no standards.
Well, Joe, it's been incredibly useful from my perspective. I want to thank you again for your time today on the call.
All right, guys, I appreciate it. Maybe we'll catch up again.
Yeah, we'll do it again, Joe.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.